Hello everyone and welcome in today's webinar. Today we will be discussing about ISO 31000 Integrated Management System. My name is Alba Kecha, the PECB organizer of this webinar, and the guest for today is Ms. Debra Hampton, PECB Certified Trainer and Lead Auditor of Quality and Environmental Management Systems. Please write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, and Ms. Hampton will answer to them accordingly. Moreover, if you want to participate directly with Debra in the discussion, you can also raise your hand, and then we will unmute you so you can make your questions directly to her. Please, Ms. Hampton, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, and welcome to this presentation. We're going to be talking about the principles and the practices of ISO 31000. If you have any problems hearing or a problem with the video, please make sure that you tell us as soon as possible so that we can address them in the very beginning. ISO 31000 is the standard which describes the methods for risk management. We want to look at these principles as how they apply to an integrated management system. In order to do that, we need to look at the standard itself. The first thing that I want to do is go over the principles that were used to design ISO 31000. Whether you are aware of it or not, whenever a standard is developed, the first thing that is done is to develop the principles that will be what makes up the heart of that standard. So the first thing that we're going to do as we talk today is to talk about those principles and how they're going to relate to us understanding. So let's begin. There are principles in this standard, as I just mentioned, and those principles are first outlined in the standard, and then from there it talks about creation of a framework. If you'll think about a house, when you start to build a building or a home, you'll have a dream first, and those principles, if you'll think about it, are like having that dream. And then the next thing that's going to be put together is that framework. From there, the standard provides us with a generic approach to effectively, efficiently, and coherently manage risk of all forms and fashions across the organization. The methods that are promoted in the ISO 31000 standard provide a systematic, transparent, and credible manner for use with any scope or context. To begin with, let's talk about risk. The definition of risk coming from our ISO standard is effect of uncertainty on objectives. We all manage risk every day. Everyone took a risk to get to the location where they are this morning. There's always a risk, but the risk may not be significant enough to block you from meeting your objectives. Each organization is striving to meet a set of goals or objectives. Risk is what could prevent them from reaching their goals or objectives. Sometimes risk can be a positive deviation. However, most of us focus on adverse or negative risk. Risk is tied to potential events and consequences. So when we think of risk, we always think about what is the consequence of if this does occur. And then we are measuring the likelihood of occurrence. Likelihood is another word that you will want to pay attention to. Consequences is a second one. To manage risk, we want to establish an owner who is accountable and has authority to manage the risk. Risk can have internal and external context. For example, there are external environmental influences such as cultural, social, legal, which can affect an organization being able to meet its objectives. Internally, their policies, objectives, strategies, even your capabilities can affect the context of risk. Sometimes the internal culture also affects internal risk. There is a diagram in the standard that I want us to pay attention to because it truly summarizes the ISO 31000 standard in one slide. If you'll notice over here, we have our principles. Here we have the framework that I mentioned, and here we have the process. So let's first look at these principles. The principles, remember, we said were the starting of the ISO 31000. Note that the first thing they said is what we do must create value. In other words, do nothing that does not add value. The second one is it must be an integral part of the organizational process. C, it must be part of our decision making. The risk framework and the process of risk management must be used in our decision making in how to plan the processes of our management system. We want our ISO 31000 standard and our framework that we create to explicitly address uncertainty. This is the purpose of the standard. This is critical. Our work must be dissected to ensure that we don't overlook any potential risk. The method of risk management must be systematic, structured, and timely. Our framework and our process will give us a method that could be repeated by anyone, and anyone would get the same or very similar results. Based on the best available information is our next principle. In other words, we must ferret out the best available methods to address and treat the risk. G, it must be tailored to our organization. One size does not fit all. It cannot be a canned program. It must be tailored to the processes and the risk of that organization. It must take human and cultural factors into account. Special attention should be given to manual, human-dependent processes as well as cultural issues. Let me just tell you a war story here to explain to you why risk needs to be considered and needs to think about the culture of the organization. I once taught a class in Papua New Guinea. We asked some of our operators in the facility to become internal auditors. We were teaching them the 3-day internal auditor course. What we had overlooked and did not understand policy to govern you. A simple one such as honesty and integrity in all we do. Minimize harm, internally and externally, today and tomorrow. Both of these could easily be a policy that's usable for safety, quality, security, finances. Make your policy as simple as possible. Third thing is to identify the processes of your organization. Now, A word of caution here, there are thousands of processes in your organization. And if you start identifying all of those, you will get bogged down on step 3 and never get to step 4. So what I encourage you to do is to, I've got a book, Turning Effort into Dollars, that's available on Amazon.com that helps you to know how to choose these processes. In a nutshell, it's the processes of the organization that turn your efforts into dollars. So focus on those processes. Step number 4 is to establish owners accountable for the risk of the processes. Number 5 is where we will identify the risk. In step number 6, we will look at the consequences of the risk. What would be the outcome if the risk occurred, if the issue occurred? The next is to assess the likelihood of the risk. If there is a chance of occurrence, what is that? How likely is it that it could occur? And we will establish those as criteria. In step 8, we treat the risk. Another term for this that I have heard in the past is to mitigate the risk. Step number 9 is to communicate and then build in a way to monitor, review, and improve the treatment of the risk. Let's look at what the framework is. If you'll look, I've got a spreadsheet. Many of you who've known me for a long time know that I think in columns and rows. And this is another example of that thinking in columns and rows. Oops. Our processes are outlined in column 1. Our second column is who is accountable to manage the risk. Our third column is what are the risks. The fourth are the consequences. If that occurs, what are the consequences? The likelihood, and our last column, how we're going to treat the risk. Looking at an example from quality, let's consider the process quoting and order processing. We would do the same thing with each of our processes that we identify. Who is accountable to manage the risk? Now this is in the quality management system, well, the customer service manager in this particular situation. The risk that we identified, and you could have more in your organization. Remember, we talked about it needed to be tailored to your organization. But the ones that we listed here are, what if the quote's incorrect, or the order entry is incorrect, or we can't deliver the date the customer requires, or if the customer has the wrong price? Well, what are the consequences? Well, an upset customer. What is the likelihood that we would have a upset customer? Highly likely. So, as we are treating this risk, we build in steps to make sure that when we do quotes, they're not incorrect. Quotes are reviewed by a second person in this organization. Order entry is acknowledged to the customer with a phone call saying, make sure that what we've entered is what you want. Third one is order entry on the production schedule. We use the production schedule to predict, but we also are making the production people be responsible for letting us know should they run into problems and know that their work is going to be late. And then another thing that we're going to do to treat the risk is we're going to give salespeople a price list that they will use so that they always have the most up-to-date price list. So now you see the arrow here, and it's reminding us that when we build the process for quoting and order processing, we want to make sure that we include these steps or these safeguards to prevent our risk from occurring. This is a little frustrating to us who have very mature systems because our systems already are designed. But this is a good exercise to go back through and make sure that every risk is designed in to be addressed even in mature systems. Okay. I want to come back to consequences. One of the problems that I see companies doing is they will put too many consequences in this column. Yes, if you have an upset customer, you're going to lose business, you're going to decrease sales, you're going to have less capital, you're going to have to lay off employees. You can go on and on with deepening of the consequences. But what we want to encourage you to do, and don't make the mistake of listing all of the secondary consequences, but only the first consequence, which is the upset customer. Okay, and let's move to the next slide. Integration. The purpose of this webinar today was to talk about how to use ISO 31000 to integrate our management system. Let's first talk about what integration is. It's a holistic approach to address all systems in an organization. Every organization has many systems. We have a quality management system. We have a financial management system. An environmental management system is present in some organizations. Almost all organizations, even service industries, have a health and safety management system. Most of us have developed some type of security system, and there are often many other types of systems in an organization. There could be food safety system, food safety management system in our food processors, or in our drug manufacturers, good manufacturing practices are another type of system. So as you go through, there are different types of system, and we want to talk about how we can integrate this system. We want to address each one using those same risk management principles, a framework, and a process of risk management. We saw an example a few moments ago of the quality management system, but let's look at one for health and safety. Notice that we've got a process here for quoting and order processing. Who is accountable is still customer service for this risk, the physical fatigue of the people sitting at a desk, but the sales manager, who is responsible for domestic sales, has salespeople traveling in vehicles and on planes, so he is very concerned with these two risks. And our international sales manager is concerned with our international travel. Actually, the consequence in this case happens to be the same. We might lose a valued employee either temporarily or permanently. Each likelihood is tied to what the risk was, and then we have a method for treating the risk identified for each. Notice that the one that is not likely, we placed a none. Now, folks, this is not the answer to the words that'll be in your risk management framework. This is an example I'm using, so in your case, you may have a very likely that travel on planes is dangerous. You make the decision about what goes in each cell. So when the processes are designed, I want to remind you, you're going to include risk treatments, and this is where the integration occurs. After you have done your framework and your risk management process, you've created these spreadsheets, that's when you go to your processes and design in the risk treatments. Notice in some cases, the accountability will have to be marked in such a way to make sure that the appropriate person is managing the risk. Let's look at security. One of the reasons I wanted to look at security was there was a duplication. Here's the person accountable to manage the risk for security of hacking of prices by competitors. And yes, the consequence was a competitive edge, so we've got two different consequences here. What is the likelihood? In some organizations, it's very likely. The international sales manager has safety of international sales. A few years ago when I was traveling back and forth to Mexico, kidnapping was a major issue. Kidnapping and mugging happened to be a major issue at that point in time. So the policy on international travel, if you go back, there was a policy on international travel that was a treatment for health and safety. And here's an overlap where the policy on international travel would be worked with to ensure that it's built into our processes. When you start building your processes, I want to say a little bit here. We've done a lot more on developing our processes and in previous webinars, but typically the standard method of drawing procedures, writing procedures, is not an effective way to design our processes. Most people create a traditional procedure that is something similar to a military standard operating procedure. These types of procedures do a poor job of making sure we cover the risk. They're hard to write, they're wordy, they're cumbersome, they're hard to follow, and they do not address the requirements of ISO 9001 for processes. ISO 9001-2008 calls them out in section 4.1, ISO 9001-2015, and right this moment that number has escaped me, but in its section on processes, it calls out even more requirements when we're making sure that our processes have been well designed. So what can we do instead of our typical procedures? We can do process maps. Our process maps, we get a thumbs up on process maps. Procedures don't work well when we are trying to integrate in and treat these risks. Okay? Process mapping, I'm going to talk just a little bit about it. Like I said, we have covered this very much, and I think PECB and I are talking about putting together some more courses, and I'd like to put one together on how to do a process map, how I do a process map with my clients. Process mapping, another term for it is deployment flow charting or swim lane charts. It's an effective method to treat risk. You can see what you're doing. It's easier for use in communicating. It's easy to monitor, review, and improve. There's a previous webinar that may help you until we get the other process mapping seminar together called Minimizing ISO 9001 Documentation that gets into this a little bit more, and I think that's available already on YouTube. Also, if you will email me and request a handout from this presentation, and if you also want the one from Minimizing ISO 9001 Documentation, I'll be glad to send it to you if you'll just send an email to me. Whoops, went too far. Okay. So in review, let's go back to where we started in review. Remember that this standard is based on principles that if we follow, we will do things to create value, avoiding things that do not create value. It will become an integral part of our decision making. It's a systematic, structured method that is tailored to our organization, that considers the issue and the factors that are regarding our organization. It is transparent. We can communicate it. It is responsive to change. We can improve it. We hang this on a framework similar to the one that I showed to you. Again, that is the one that I have done. You're welcome to create other types of framework. That one just works for me. And then we go through our process, which are the 10 steps. Like I said, if you will send me an email, I will send you a copy of the slide I just showed you and these 10 steps. In closing, I want to remind you that something that Albert Einstein said. He says, any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. I may not be a genius, but I have the courage to move in the opposite direction and make a simple system. I hope you do too. Richard Branson of Virgin puts it another way. He says complexity is your enemy. And I truly believe that with management systems. The more complex, the less effective they are. Any fool can make something complicated. Simple. Remember, just kiss it. Keep it simple, sweetie. Simple's better. It's easier to read. It's easier to communicate. It's easier to follow. It's easier to edit when needing. And we all have to audit our system. Auditing is quicker and easier. Audits are more accurate. And you can focus your audits on what you want them to be auditing. Just a little bit about who I am and what we do. Cornerstone Engineering, Training, and Consulting is a partner of PECB. We've been helping companies create foundations for their future since 1984. And we want to help you create a fully integrated management system based on the principles of ISO 31000. We look forward to you contacting us. You can also go to our website, www.ce-q.com. Please, we look forward to hearing from you to request a handout for this presentation. Thank you so much for participating today. I think I want to thank PECB for offering these free webinars, they are truly making a difference in our world of trying to make our organizations more effective.
Ms. Debra, thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Very welcome. I enjoy. Do you have any questions?
Yes, we do. We have some questions. We have a lot of them actually, but we will answer just a few of them because of the time limit. I will start with the first one. Are there comprehensive, fully defined and fully accepted accountabilities for risk controls and risk treatment tasks for all individuals and committees at all levels of the organization? If you want, I can repeat the question.
No, I understand it. You have to use wisdom. You do your very best to address all risk. And then if you remember, one of the steps is you're constantly monitoring and reviewing and improving on your framework. As you get better and treat the risk that you know about, you will be able to add other risk. So you'll be able to peel another layer off of the onion each time you monitor and review. So essentially you will eventually get to the point where you can't think of any more risk that need to be addressed. But in the beginning you focus on those that need to be addressed because of using your own wisdom for your organization. Good question.
Thank you very much for your answer. The next question is there periodically review to determine whether the risk management framework, policy and plan are still appropriate given the organizational, external and internal context?
Yes, you need to build in that review. Most of your management systems, your environmental management systems, your security, your quality, your health and safety, your good manufacturing practices, food safety, all of those require you to do a management review. I build my review of my framework into those meetings. They may not occur during those meetings, but that's the catalyst. When I've got to present to that meeting, I will think about, are there any of these that need to be addressed or edited? Next question.
The next question is, what is the metrics to monitor process of risk management process?
Internal auditing. Yes, you will be monitoring the risk management process. It's not an auditable standard because it's guidelines and principles, but every time you do an internal audit, you will be auditing your ability to effectively add value with a risk management process. Again, let me go back. ISO 31000 is not an auditable standard. You cannot audit to ISO 31000. It is the principles and guidelines for risk management. Okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Debra. We have another question. Is it necessary to access the risk management in all sections of a company according to the latest version of QMS?
You do. I'm not sure what they mean about sections, but all processes, yes. All processes, you must assess the risk. That is a requirement of the 2015 standard. You do not have to include the other management systems. 2015 does not require you to also address the environmental management system issues. It does require you to address 9001 2015 does require you to address all processes and the risk within those processes.
Thank you again. The next question is, why did you choose to use accountability instead of responsibility?
Because that's the words from the standard. The ISO 31000 focuses on the word accountability. In my language, I typically think about responsibility and authority, but accountability summarizes and puts those two together. Accountability is you can't be accountable without taking responsibility and authority. Next question.
Yes, the next question is risk management regarded by everyone as essential for the achievement of objectives?
Everyone, I'm not sure who everyone is, but our ISO 9001:2015 standard is requiring risk management. So if you are going to stay certified, stay registered, stay as a registered organization to ISO 9001, then you must address risk management.
Thank you. The next question is, what seem to be the most used enterprise risk management measurement models?
The most used is probably a FEMA, a failure mode effects analysis. But those go too deep. You'll see people use, what I'm showing you is similar to a FEMA, but it's simpler. So the most used is FEMA. FEMAs take forever. They argue over, is this a 3 or a 2? And it wastes a lot of time. So mine is much more simpler. Next. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, we will have the final question, the last one. What are the benefits of formally addressing risk management through ISO 31000 compared to other risk management standards?
Well, there isn't another standard, another ISO 9001 standard that addresses risk management. It's the only one. The other ones are made from the principles, the risk management standards, the ISO 9001, 14001, 18001, soon to be 45001. All of those risk management standards are based on addressing risk in the same way that the ISO 31000 is. ISO 31000 is like the guideline for understanding what risk management is. So I don't think that there is another standard to govern that.
Thank you again, Ms. Hampton, for this excellent presentation. I hope and believe that every participant enjoyed the webinar and got very useful information from it. I want to thank all the attendees as well for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and we received all your questions, and because of the time limited, we will answer to the rest of the questions individually by email. Please check PECB's webinar schedule in our website www.pecb.com or our official social media network, since next week we are organizing webinars on interesting topics. Next Monday, on 26th of October, for all French speakers, we are hosting a project management webinar. Thank you again, Ms. Debra, for the presentation. If you have anything to add, please feel free.
I just want to thank the participants, and I look forward to hearing from you and sending you handouts from this presentation.
Thank you very much again. See you next webinar.